Hey everyone, I'm Patrick Jones, and welcome to episode 44 of That Gives Me Anxiety. I'm going to keep this intro a little bit shorter than I normally do because the episode's a little bit longer and I want to get right to it. In today's episode, our anxiety is caused by adopting, and we're looking at adoption from a few different ways or vantage points. I have on my friend Luke Ward, who I know from the New York City improv world. His family adopted his daughter through an agency. And I also have on CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation, Rita Soronen. The Dave Thomas Foundation is a charity that works with helping kids to get adopted from foster care. So yeah, two different ways of looking at it, but I'm sure for people who have adopted or thinking about adopting or were adopted as a child, can speak to the anxiety related to the process and how daunting it can feel and yeah, so I thought it was important to show a few different sides of adoption in this episode. So yeah, before we start talking to Luke and Rita, I just want to remind you that if you're liking the show, to please remember to rate and review it. You can check the show out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And if you're liking the show and you want to support it and support me, you can make a donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link. It's in the description wherever you're listening. And that's always very much appreciated. Well, let's jump right into it. Thank you so much to Luke. Thank you so much to Rita, and thank you to you for listening. Joining me now on the podcast, I have comedian Luke Ward. Luke, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, you're very welcome. You're welcome. It's not the first time someone stumbled over my name, so
yeah.
I get it. It's this too.
I get so anxious about the intro and nailing it for no reason.
Yep.
There's no reason for me to be worried. Like I could just edit it, but
no,
I'm just gonna keep
I get it.
Yeah.
We're both improvisers, so I know how much pressure it is to like be good at thinking on the spot.
Yeah,
I know it sounds sarcastic, but it's legit. Like, you think that like, okay, I've got to be really funny right away, every moment of every second of every day because I'm an improviser. Okay, go, good.
First thought, best thought. Yeah.
No, not that funny.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, we know each other from the Pitt improv community. And mainly I wanted to give a shout out to the show that you had put on that you cast me in, the Muppet show. I forget the name of the series, but I remember it being a Muppet.
It was We Love TV.
That's what
and it was basically like fanfic theater or spec script theater, we'd call it. Yeah. So I would just, the Muppet show was a unique one because it was me and Caitlin Fontana and Sean Reedy all got together and wrote different sketches for the Muppets, and we tied it all into like one big Muppet show. Mm-hmm. So each of us had a different sketch we wrote, but we also wrote the different tie-ins to each thing, and so yeah, that was an interesting one.
It was a fun one. I mean, just so fun. I mean, as a performer, I mean, when do you get to play a Muppet, right? It's just, it was a lot of fun.
It made me realize that like Fozzie Bear is like who I was meant to be.
Yes.
I was destined to be Fozzie Bear.
Yeah, well, we are on here today to talk about adoption, which you have adopted your daughter. I apologize. Yes. I don't know her name.
Ramona.
Oh,
her name is Ramona. Like the see. Okay, this is gonna be tangential, but it's whatever. No, it was. I want to say it's based on the book series, but it kind of is. But by the way, I should preface all of this that we talk about. It gets into like adoption is very hard. It is traumatic in every sense of the word, but it has a good ending. And everybody I know who's ever adopted has adopted because something happened where they couldn't have children the old-fashioned way, so they went that route, and because of that, it's usually something negative. Like my wife had breast cancer. She's in remission now, and everything's fine. But that put a damper on, which we didn't know at the time, but we knew it. Well, okay. When she was diagnosed and they gave her the whole treatment spiel, they said, oh, by the way, this could really do some damage to your baby making facilities. That is the worst way to phrase that. But anyway, so
we understand what you mean. Yeah.
No, anyway, so for about 6 months prior to the diagnosis, we had been struggling to have a child. It had been, she had gone through a series of tests. I went through the one test where they just make sure your boys can swim. And It took like 6 months to figure out, okay, this is what the problem is. It was a weird glandular sort of thing. We finally got it under control, and we were like, was on this medicine, and then she got diagnosed with breast cancer around like Thanksgiving of 2010. Mm-hmm. And I like to say that my emotions are on West Coast time. So when we found out like on a Friday night, and I was just like, okay, this sucks, but we'll deal with it. It'll be fine. And then the next day, I woke up and Michelle was in the living room watching a movie, and she was watching the movie Ramona and Beezus, which was it's a movie with Selena Gomez and Joey King from years ago, and it's based on the books. No one has seen this movie.
No idea what that is. Yeah.
Yeah. No one's seen this movie, but like a million amazing. Sandra Oh is in it. And,
oh, wow.
What's the name? Aiden from Sex and the City is in it. And just Josh Duhamel is in it. Anyway, she's watching the movie and she's like really coming to terms with the diagnosis and just being like, okay, I just want to watch this movie. These books were my favorite as a kid, and this is fun. And there was something about like this precocious little like 8-year-old kid running around doing her thing. And I was like, that's the kid we're not going to have. Oh God. And I just sobbed uncontrollably. Oh. And my wife, who had just been diagnosed, was like, get it together, man. Like, I'm the one with the cancer, not you. And I was like, I know. This is but the point is of that whole story is that we were like, okay, that's the kid that we hope to have. And that's why we named her Ramona, because of the movie.
That's adorable.
That was nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had found out that your wife's ability to have a child has dampered. I mean, obviously that's mixed in with cancer, right? That's just like a swirling, a lot of emotions are going on there. But when did you guys decide to start looking into adoption?
I think a few months after. My wife would know this, and I should know this, but I don't. It's all a blur.
I'd imagine, yeah.
Yeah. It all kind of blends together, and you're like, oh wait, what year is that? Who was I? Yeah, I think a few months after she was done with her final treatment, and she was feeling better.
So that makes sense.
But she's also like, my wife gets diagnosed with cancer, and right away she's like, okay, there is a walk where you walk 40 miles to raise money for breast cancer. I'm going to do that within 2 months. And I was like, oh, okay. That's just who she is. Like, she's the kind of person that's like, okay, go. I have to do this. I have to do this. Why
can't I do it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so there is a strong possibility that while we were going through the whole process, she was like, okay, gathering pieces of information, blah, blah, blah. But I think we took a full time, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Cause it's a process. It's like a whole thing.
Yeah.
You have to, there's different ways in there's private adoption where that's kind of like the version you see in the movies and TV, where it's like you hire a lawyer, you literally put an ad in the Penny Saver, like in Juno.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Searching. Yeah. It's mostly in the South. I'd be curious if it's still, I mean, you're in the South, so I don't know if you find a Penny Saver, see if they're in the back there, like parent seeking, whatever. And then you hire a lawyer to take care of the paperwork, but you do all of the heavy lifting. You do all the work. You take ads out in the Penny Saver, you put together a website, you have to get, and this was like 10 years ago, so I don't know if it's still how they do it, but you get an 800 number that you have to man 24 hours a day.
What?
Because a potential birth mother could call you at any hour of the day.
And you don't want to just list your number in a random Penny Saver.
No, and you don't want to miss the call either.
Right.
So you can't like let it go to voicemail, because they could change their mind at any second. You have to be on call. And it's nerve-wracking, because it's just putting it out there into the ether. And you also, and I hate saying this, but money becomes a big factor in all this. It gets very expensive.
Well, even what you've just described, it's similar steps to start a small business. I mean,
yes.
Yeah, that's like a lot.
And like that. I mean, the thing is too, when you're doing it privately, you put in your own money, and you could like you can also, depending on the state where the birth mother lives, that will decide how much or how little money you can give to the birth mother. So there's some states that say like you can't pay rent, or you can't pay more than X amount of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just say, okay, well, I'll give you $500 a month, because for the next few months, because what you want too is you want that birth mother to take care of herself. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, I mean, I don't have the exact stats and I don't know what it, and so, but our experience was birth mothers are not putting their child up for adoption because they're just not ready. It's not like Juno in that sense. They're doing it because they're in a very bad place, in a very, very bad place. And so your job is to as when it's a private situation, not your job, but you try to help them stay healthy, go to doctor's appointments, and you're doing this, miles away. So if you're in New York, somebody in Mississippi, you're just kind of calling every day saying, hey, can you get to the doctor's appointment today? Do you need me to call you a cab? Do you need me to have food delivered to your house? And then there's the agency route. And even that, we've had friends who adopted who had a very different agency experience than we had, but we had one that took care of everything. Their whole philosophy, and the name of the agency is Adoptions from the Heart. They're an amazing, amazing group, afth.org, if you'd like to donate. And their whole function is to be I can't remember the term that they use, but basically to the baby is like their main concern. So they try to put together families. They search for birth families. They search for adoptive families, but they are primarily they want to make sure that the baby has the best situation possible. And so that means that they will, the social workers there will take birth mothers to the doctor. They will provide money for food. And they also, all of the fees and things that come up, they put into escrow. So if the birth mother changes her mind, which does happen fairly often,
I'd imagine
that money is not gone. That money goes back into escrow. But the big difference there is that everything is open. And an open adoption means that you agree to have contact in some way with the birth mother or birth parents for the rest of the child's life until the child turns 18, and the child can decide if they want to maintain contact or not.
Okay.
It's a weird experience. And part of like, we were talking about off mic, it's a very weird feeling you're basically adding two people to your life, not just a baby. You're adding, a birth mother and or a birth father. And so what I was saying about off mic is like, you're adding even more people's stories to the mix. There are more people involved, and it's a hard concept to grasp for me at first. It was definitely hard for family and friends to, family especially, because there's such a unknown variable with adoption to begin with, and then you're adding a different, another person on top of that. It makes things confusing for family members.
Whereas and we'll just phrase it as the old-fashioned way, it's like your mom and dad and our genetic material is where you came from. And so in this case, it's more, there's just a little bit more conversation that has to go.
Yeah. I mean, the story has always been with our daughter is that we're your mom and dad, but there was a woman who carried you in her belly for 9 months. And she wanted you to have the best life, so she picked us to be your parents, and we're your parents, and we're it.
Yeah.
And it's the phraseology gets very tricky.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like any sort of language, you don't know how, like they tell you say things like, you don't say anymore, give up for adoption, because no one's giving up. People are making very hard decisions. No one's giving
up. Of course. Yeah.
And I don't personally like the term adoptive father. Like there's a little kid on our block who, and everybody know, like our daughter is Black and Latina. My wife and I are extra white. We are super duper white.
Yeah.
And so nobody is like, oh, hey, everybody, it's, and she's also, she's beautiful. I mean, like, I don't know if you've ever seen Colin Kaepernick. He was adopted.
Yeah.
His parents are just these 3 foot tall little troll people. And he's like this bronze, beautiful, like golden god, and so that we're like, that's us, we're just like, hi, how are you? We're Ramona's parents. How are you doing? And so, like there was a little kid on the street and she was like, oh, I know that you're not her real dad. And I was like, no, I'm her real dad. I'm not biologically her dad, but I'm her real dad. And the kid was like not being a dick. The kid was just, 6 or 5 or whatever, and just trying to figure some stuff out. And she was like, oh, no, I didn't. And she even said, she's like, oh, right, I didn't mean to say not real. It's like biological. And I was like, yeah. And thankfully, it's a neighborhood kid that we're all the parents are friends and stuff. So I was like, I have wiped this girl's butt so many times that I am officially her real dad. Like,
Yeah.
I get to lay claim to that.
Yes.
As soon as you clean up pounds of poop from a person, you can say, yes,
Right.
you are you're their parents.
Right. That actually comes up in legal in
yes.
court.
Yep. Yeah. We had to agree to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for the listeners, I also interviewed CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation. Her name is Rita Soronen. And so we have 3 clips to feature. And I think it's a good time to go to the first clip.
Sure.
So let me get this straight. In today's day and age, you're supposed to be drinking a ton of water, doing yoga, making sure you and your whole family is happy, strike a good work-life balance, exercise, read books, watch movies, eat healthy meals, be a big part of your community, and get 8 hours of sleep. It's unrealistic. It's too much. Well, that's why there's Instacart to take a little bit off your plate, or help put a little bit on your plate. Oh, I'm so sorry. Using Instacart, you search for all your favorite foods and items that you need from the grocery store, fresh produce, all your favorites, everything you want, and they deliver it to you. They go to the store and do your shopping for you. Just remove it from your to-do list, just with a few clicks. And you'll have your items delivered to your door in as fast as an hour. It's pretty quick. And through the link in the episode description, they're offering free delivery on your first order over $35. But you got to make sure you click the link in the description. That tells Instacart that this show sent you and it helps support the show. And you can also take advantage of the free delivery. So yeah, be nice to yourself. Give Instacart a shot. Joining me now on the podcast, I have Rita Soronen, who's president and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation. Rita, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a delight to be here with you.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about adoption today, and specifically adoption through foster care.
That's right. Yep. And my favorite subject, as you might guess. And I'm looking forward to talking all about, the apprehension people might have, or just the misperceptions they may have, or just not everybody knows a lot about it. So it'll be good to chat about what this conversation is all about.
Of course. Yeah. And for listeners of this podcast, the whole podcast is meant to make things known and to make things less scary, and information is always helpful. So kind of jumping right in here, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about what the foundation does?
Sure. I'm delighted to be at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. It's a national nonprofit public charity that was founded by Dave Thomas. Some people may recognize and know him as the founder of the Wendy's company, those Frosties and French fries and square hamburgers. But what they may not know is that he was adopted as well. And so as he was getting on in his career and really wanted to put in place that notion of giving back to the community, it was built into the company's DNA. But they really wanted to sort of formalize, what does that mean? He created the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption as a national nonprofit public charity to focus exclusively in the United States and Canada on children who were in foster care and waiting to be adopted. And we're wholly separate from the Wendy's company, but we are proud partners in all kinds of activities, including the fact that we're the charity of choice of Wendy's franchisees and suppliers and the corporate office. But that notion in 1992, when he created the foundation, was to really begin to elevate this conversation about certainly all kinds of adoption. If people are thinking about creating or expanding their family, there are lots of ways to do that. But in 1992, there wasn't a lot of conversation or understanding about what is this notion of adopting a child who's already had a family and they're in foster care and they're there for a reason, but we're not sure why, and how might I get into that? So he really wanted the foundation to step into beginning to elevate that conversation, talking about what the process was. But we're also, as a nonprofit organization, a grant-making organization. So beginning to share our resources with other organizations that could effectively and efficiently move children out of foster care and into adoptive homes. So we do all of that in a number of ways.
Incredible. I mean, what a man concentrated on joy and happiness, right? Whether it's as small as a cheeseburger or as large as helping a child find a forever home.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, that's wonderful. I guess I'd like to share that. I do have a little bit of experience with the foster care. I was going to say industry, but that's incorrect. But just the foster care system. My grandparents, after having several kids of their own, opened their home to many different
Wow.
children. Some for brief stints, and they adopted, I want to say, as many as 5 or 6 officially.
Wow.
And so growing up, there was always another kid running around, and they may have stayed and be technically one of my aunts or uncles now, or it's. And I just share that as more of having seen the foster care system and the needs of the children coming through, right? Like my grandparents weren't equipped to help everyone, be it a child who witnessed something unfortunate and it had to be moved out of the home. It takes so much. And so I wanted to just put it out there that there are such more people, and people who do get into caring for other children. I mean, it's just, it's so heartwarming to think of how big these people's hearts really are.
That's awesome. And I love hearing those stories. And what we find in the work at the foundation is the more we reach out, the more we talk, it really has either fostering as foster parents or volunteering somehow and becoming a mentor to a child, or taking that step and adopting from foster care has impacted a lot of people. So it's great to hear those stories. And I think the more we hear the conversation, the less scary or the less just unknown it becomes. And these children then have a better chance at both a childhood and a thriving adulthood.
Of course, yeah. And I feel like the stories that do tend to rise to the top are when things go sour or something unfortunate has happened. And it's just like, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me. It may be something that you would be able to speak to, but it happens with all kinds of news, right? That we hear the negative and not the larger percentage of positive stories.
That's exactly it. And look, these children are in care through no fault of their own. They've been abused or neglected or abandoned, or much more frequently over the past couple of decades, parents have substance abuse issues that rise to such a level that they can't care for their children. It's a rare parent that intends to harm their child, right? But what we know is that children have to be protected, they have to be safe. And that's when the state intervenes if there's a circumstance where either a child's physically abused, sexually abused, or that notion of neglect, doesn't have food, housing, appropriate care, then that's when the state takes an interest. And right now, as we're talking today, there are about 434,000 children in foster care. They're in some sort of substitute care in the United States. Now, hopefully they're with extended family. That's the first best place for these children, but so many of them are not. They're in sort of stranger homes. Our goal is to get those children home. Is there a way to provide wraparound services, support? What does this family need to keep that child and to get that child back home? That's where children grow and thrive. Look, we're all homing pigeons at heart. No matter what we've experienced, home is where we identify. And so that's our job, is to get them there. But right now, for about 117,000 of those children, the abuse has risen to such a level that the courts have made a determination after quite a period of time that this child can never go home. And so the court legally separates that child from family. And then those are the children for whom the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption really centers its programs and its communications. That 117,000 children who have been freed for adoption. They're no longer a part of that biological family, at least legally. And now they're waiting for another family to step forward and bring them into their home.
Excellent. Yeah. Oh, man. That's so many kids. My goodness. Yeah. Let's talk about the different kinds of adoption, right? We're talking about foster care. Just because of my history and growing up, I thought that was like the main way. But I guess another one comes to mind of just like an orphanage. And so I guess, why would a kid wind up in an orphanage? I frankly, I don't even know if we still do orphanages here in the United States. And now that I've given you 15 questions at once while rambling, I will be quiet and allow you to speak.
No, it's perfect. That's what these conversations are all about. There are multiple ways that a child gets adopted. One that's most frequent and probably less complex is step parent adoption, right? The child is adopted by a step parent.
Mm-hmm.
But the other main kinds, in addition to foster care, is international adoption. So folks may want to go to another country. Typically, that's because they're interested in adopting an infant, and they have this global view of the world. They may be driven by some faith-based tenet, or they may be driven by this notion that children shouldn't be in orphanages. And that's typically where orphanages exist now, are in foreign countries, not in the United States. We've got group homes in the United States that are getting less frequent, where numbers of children would stay together for a temporary period of time. But technically, we don't have orphanages at all in the United States anymore. And then there's that notion of domestic private infant adoption. So a family that's really, really wants to bring an infant into their home for whatever reason, they either can't have an infant or they choose not to, but they still want to raise a child from infancy. Then they go through attorneys and private agencies and frequently are in contact with the birth mother, and then adopt that child once that child is born. The difference with foster care adoption, again, is those children are placed there because they've experienced certain layers of trauma. And the difference is there are fewer infants in the foster care system. They may be part of sibling groups, but the average age of a child in foster care waiting to be adopted is about 9. And so we begin to talk about what would it be like to bring an older child into your home, if perhaps you've already had, you've raised a family from infancy. You've had either through the other kind of adoption or through birth, you've raised children from infancy, and you've decided you still have room in your home, but you don't really want to deal with diapers or midnight feedings or raising a toddler again. That's where this notion of considering an older youth adoption really is the sweet spot of foster care adoption. Because here's what we also know is that every year, even though we've promised to these children that our job is to find them a family if they've been legally freed for adoption, about 20,000 children each year turn 18 and leave the foster care without a family. They either came in at an older age, they may have come in at 15 or 16. And so families tend not to think about a 16-year-old as their first idea of adopting out of foster care. And so they age out. We call it aging out of foster care. We also know that the result of a child leaving foster care without a family can cause challenges for that child, not because they're bad kids, but they're much more likely, because they don't have that safety net of family, to be homeless or to be undereducated or to be unemployed or to fall into other systems again. So our job is to, no matter what the age of a child is, no matter what their journey has been, no matter what that family circumstance has been, our job is to make sure that every child who has been freed for adoption and is in the foster care system waiting for a family has every opportunity for an adoptive family and a home.
That's an extremely worthwhile mission. It's also, talking about aging out at 18. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can say with certainty that I didn't have my legs under me until, let's be honest, 26, right? Where I felt, all right, I know exactly what I need to be doing and moving forward. And very lucky to have had a family that supported me, right? So it's 18 is still a baby, right?
It's a crazy way of thinking that a child can be on their own at 18 and thrive. Mm-hmm. And so when there are challenges, we ascribe fault to those children. Well, they must have done something wrong, right?
Yeah.
Think of it, I've got to have a car and a place to live and a job. And so I might have lined all those things up, and then my car breaks down and I can't get to my job, and I am living on, from paycheck to paycheck. And suddenly all 3 of those are gone and I'm homeless. And if I had a family and my car broke down, I could call mom or I could call dad and I could say, I know you're going to get mad at me, but I need a ride to work. And they'll get there, right? Or they can come back home at 21 or 26 or 30. Or think about these children during the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. They were already placed in care. All of those visits with potential adoptive families or their social workers or extended family members stopped for a certain period of time. So they're already isolated, and that compounded that sense of isolation. Or they move frequently when they're in care because a foster family says, you know what, I can't take care of a child any longer right now, or during the pandemic, they had health or economic issues. And so a child had to move again. And so again, all of those issues that begin to compound on that child's life and their soul and their shoulders of frequent moves, of being more at risk of even during the pandemic, of contracting COVID, of not knowing where I'm going to be tomorrow. Am I going to be going to school? They might be living in a household that didn't have access to solid internet. And so school became an issue. The challenges for our children in foster care were compounded dramatically during the pandemic, as they were for everyone, of course. But this population of children who already had experienced that trauma of removal from their home, of going into a strange government system, and now having to somehow figure out how to thrive, or if they left care during the pandemic, figuring out how to get a job, how to support themselves. It was just phenomenal. We're starting to come out of that, but we've learned a lot from that alone.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And I mean, everyone can sort of appreciate the fact that if your basic needs aren't met, you can't focus on the next level task of going to school. Or if you're hungry, your first thought is, and you won't advance past the fact that I'm hungry, right?
Exactly.
Or wondering where you're going to live. I mean, our brains really can only handle so much at a time to focus on.
Exactly. And children at that age are still in brain development, right? And so that executive decision-making capacity that, look, in normal thriving families, if you go to a party and you start talking about your teenagers, what happens to everybody in the room? Everybody starts rolling their eyes. They've got a horror story about what my teenager did, right? They're doing that because that's the normal developmental stage of teenager. They're testing, they're asserting their independence, they're challenging. That's what they're supposed to be doing. But you add that to the layers of trauma of a 17-year-old in foster care, wondering where they're going to be, and you're going to potentially have some acting out behaviors or some challenges with trust. They're experiencing such grief and loss and continuing lack of trust because potentially some of them have been raised in a system that, again, we put these children at such a disadvantage. Our responsibility is to, as quickly as we can, get them into the safety net of a family and allow them to make mistakes, allow them to grow and thrive, allow them to try and assert their independence and challenge the status quo, because that's how we all learned how to be adults. But somehow we deny that of children in foster care.
I know, that's so sad. You're exactly right. I love the way of putting it. That's what they're supposed to be doing, right? You're supposed to be, that's this natural step from childhood to adulthood.
Exactly.
So yeah, some people tend to look down on people, children, right? who are only doing what's naturally their brains are inclining them to do. I said this to you off mic, but I'm going to say it again. You know, if this is too personal, please push back. What made you decide as a couple to go the route that you went? You know, and Rita was talking about foster care adoptions, and you were mentioning before there are many kinds of adoptions. Why did your route work for you?
There was a couple of different factors, and I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. I'm a very logical, blah, blah, blah. But as we were doing research, different things fell into place that felt like the universe was like, okay, this is the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so we researched private adoption. It felt too out of control for us. There were too many unknown variables. We actually went to a support group for people looking to adopt.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really painful to watch. It was really hard to go.
Just people were at the end of the rope or unsure about how to move forward, or
people were, I mean, there were a bunch of people that, like, one woman was there who just went to the meetings once a month. She kept saying she was deciding if she wanted to adopt or not, but I got the sense she was like a tourist. You know, there was another couple there who had dropped $40,000, $30,000, something like that, and on a birth mother who changed her mind at the last minute.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and it was hard, you know, and there were just a lot of stories. And then this woman came in with her baby who she just adopted, and she was seeing everybody, and she was smiling, and she was happy with the baby, but then she looked and saw the couple, and she was like, "Oh no, why are you here?" And it dawned on her that everything fell apart, and it was gut wrenching, and it was really. and we had just been through so much trauma with cancer and stuff that we just thought, like, how do we alleviate some of this trauma?
Yeah.
How do we get through this as peacefully as possible?
Mm-hmm.
There was talk for a brief moment of surrogacy, but we just felt like that it's not legal per se. I mean, you can have someone else's baby in New York State, and we lived in New York State at the time.
Mm.
You can't pay someone to have your baby. So you can pay for their care, but you can't give them cash and whatever. So, but it just felt dicey, and it felt like, for us anyway, it felt like if we went that route, then we're monitoring the behavior of this person who we know, who, you know, if they do something wrong, are we going to hold it against them? Or if the baby, you know, is like not good at math, are we going to be like, well, so-and-so, I think, had a glass of wine during the pregnancy. That's probably why, you know. So we're like, let's not do that. And then in the course of our research, one of my friends from my job at the time had just adopted her daughter, and she talked to her social worker, and they recommended Adoptions from the Heart. And so we got on a call with them, and we just loved everything that they said. Like, everything was like, yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, great. And then we called them up, like, I think 20 minutes later, or maybe the next day, and just said, hey, we'd like to sign up with you guys. And like, the social worker who we wound up going with answered the phone, and she was amazing. And she, like, this is going to be one of the most old man things I say, but she was like this 24-year-old kid who was just like a social worker who did this every day. And she was just like, yeah, I'll help you out. Let's do this. And blah, blah. And she took us through the process, and we started. And everything kind of felt right with that route.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it's just like you go into a store, you try on a pair of pants. If it, you know, if
it's
if it feels good. I mean, to wildly oversimplify it, but
no, but
right.
it just, like, you know, it's you know, one of the things I learned with Michelle's cancer was, like, you know, before that, you know, you go to the doctor and you're like, oh, I have a sore throat. And the doctor looks at you and goes, okay, yep, you have strep throat. Here's some medicine. Go home. See you in a couple of weeks. If it gets worse, call me. And blah, blah, blah. And then when you have something like cancer or something terminal or something long-term or whatever, they kind of go, we're going to try this. And we're going to try this. What do you think? And you're like, how the hell? I mean, you're the
doctor.
You're the doctor. You know, I don't know. It's a bit, you get into this kind of, like, not a guessing game, but you have to go with your gut more than you'd like to.
Okay.
And so that, I think, set the stage a bit for us for the adoption thing, where we felt like, okay, we went with our gut on a lot of stuff. I mean, we weighed the pros and cons, but we just went with our gut on a lot of stuff, especially when it came to adopting transracially. Because that was a big decision. That was one of the bigger decisions of the whole piece, because, you know, we knew living in Brooklyn, it wouldn't be a big deal. You know, no one would raise an eye or bat an eye or raise whatever. They wouldn't bat their eyes, whatever they would do. But where I grew up in like Western upstate New York, I was concerned, frankly. I thought, I wasn't sure how to handle the situation.
Right.
And then we just did some research, and it's funny, we were talking about this the other day. We went to this, like, all-day seminar of just learning about different adoption stuff. You know, how to handle forms and how to handle this and how to handle baby care and blah, blah, blah. And we went to this one on how to adopt transracially, and we're like, okay, we're going to learn everything here. And the guy that taught it was, like, horribly racist. He was really offensive. No. Oh yeah, it was awful. It was awful. I mean, I won't even, you know, and he was saying how like everything was terrible. Like, the kids who had been adopted transracially grew up to be horrible people. And so we were just like, and my wife is, like, again, who's like this powerhouse, very outspoken woman, was just like, you could, like, people came up to us afterwards and they were like, is she okay? Because she was, like, shaking, she was, like, grunting, just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna say something to this guy. And so that, and then later, well, there was something else later that happened, but, like, that was a moment where we were like, if this racist piece of shit can do this, then we can do it.
Right.
We can do it.
Yeah. My goodness. Oh,
Yeah. And it was, but then like an hour later, so it was sponsored by, I cannot remember the name. It was a Jewish community group in the city, and in New York City, for those listeners outside of New York. And the guy that ran it was this Orthodox Jewish man who adopted his daughter from Venezuela. And at the very end of the day, they had the adult children of adoption. So they were all like in their 20s and telling their story. And this young woman who's Venezuelan was telling her story, and she was just really well put together. She was talking about her business and how successful she was, and how, growing up, and she was different from her parents, but it was okay, and blah, blah, blah. And then from the back, you hear this dad say, you hear someone just go like, "Oh, isn't she beautiful?" And it was the guy, sponsoring, who's this like tiny little Jewish man. And the woman went from like this put together older woman to like a 10-year-old girl right when she was like, "Dad."
Oh my gosh.
And it was that universal, like, embarrassed by my parents. And that for me too was also like, parental love is universal.
Yeah.
It is. It's just, there are certain things when you adopt transracially that you do have to keep in mind and be prepared to do and be aware of. But like, love is love is love. And so that was a big like, okay, cool, we can do this.
I love that.
I hope that answered your question. I kind of feel like I went on a long tangent there.
It absolutely does. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's so, you described a support group, and you described this seminar, some of which may have been almost ruined by a racist guy. But it seems like there is quite a bit of support out there for people who have recently adopted, are navigating the process. Did you feel like that's the case? Yeah.
So the agency advocates, that's the word I was looking for before. Their whole primary thing is to advocate for the baby.
Yeah.
And then there's also a social worker who is like an independent contractor, not the social worker that we went through who works for the agency, but one that helps us and did like the home study, which they check your house out and make sure that everything is cool. She was the one who was very supportive in offering us a lot of resources and things to say, okay, yeah, this is normal and this is okay, and blah, blah, blah. There are a bunch of resources out there, especially, in the age of social media.
Yeah.
It's a good way to find it locally. And where we live, there's just a ton of parents who have adopted. So pre-COVID, we had started going to meetups with other adoptive families, but it's slowed down a bit. But you see a lot of transracial families around here, a lot of families built by adoption, a lot of families like on our block. We had she just moved, so it's we had a single mom by choice. She had a donor and all that, and so everything feels kind of normal. Because there's so many different sort of things. So hopefully when you adopt, or if you've just adopted, or if you're looking, you find people who are in your situation. And I also find, like, we had my friend who had just adopted. She was a coworker, and she became a close friend, who was kind of like our adoption mentor. So she was the one we would just call and say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? But also I recall too, we would call the social worker at the agency. I mean, even to just say, we feel really depressed today and feel like nothing's going to happen. Can you just tell us it's going to be okay? And she'd be like, again, 24 years old. And she'd be like, yeah, you're going to be okay. This is very normal. I've seen this a million times, and your baby is out there, and blah, blah, blah. And so I found that, like, and again, I think that's going through the agency process. I think what's nice about that is you have those resources there.
Yeah.
When it's just you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting yourself, and you're having to find these support groups and having to find these things yourself. So,
I mean, sometimes for much less things, I need to hear that everything's going to be all right.
Oh
right?
my God.
So...
Yeah. It was nice to just be able to pick up a phone and be like, just say everything's gonna be okay. And pat her head over the phone. That would be great.
That's awesome.
And she did.
Well, now I
She did.
think is a good time to go to the second clip where Rita talks about the difficulty of the process and talks about some of the support groups that are out there that her organization works with. I want to switch and talk about the other side of this. So I don't know if you've seen it, and I don't know. It's always a risk to put a reference out there to see if, because then if you haven't seen it, we're misconnecting a little bit. But the idea for this episode came from a TV show called Trying. It's a UK-based show, an HBO, and at first they were trying to get pregnant and couldn't, and then they started into the adoption care system, and it talks about like the issues and the lengths that they had to go. Is that accurate? Is it a particularly difficult process?
It is. It can be a difficult process, first and foremost, because it's an unknown. None of us know anything about the child welfare system unless we've either worked there, we've experienced it from a lived experience, or somehow we're connected through social workers or judges or courts or some way. Otherwise, it's just this unknown territory. But look, it's a government system. At the heart of it, it's a government system. These children are in the custody of the state. And so it's fraught with all of those challenges of overwhelmed workers, a constant turnover of workers because they're not paid well enough for the work that they do. And it's burnout. This is hard work, or a lack of a return phone call. Though that's the negative side. But there are also these time periods that it takes. So we don't want to quickly make decisions. We want to make sure that a child is safe. There are both legislative timelines and there are policy timelines about what happens at each stage in this process from the point of removal of a child from foster care. They may come in, an adult could go in and get trained and licensed as a foster parent. They can get trained and licensed as a foster to adopt parent. So they may have had a child in their home for a period of time fostering them. And then the decision was made that this child can't go home. They're freed for adoption. And then that family is looked at for potential adoption. That takes time. But even that, stepping into the process. So there's paperwork to fill out. There are classes, mandatory classes to take. There are background checks that have to occur, of course, for the safety of the children. There's a home study where there's a thorough look at the safety of the home, of the people in the home, of background checks on all the people in the home. So there's a home study that has to occur. Each one of these things takes time and aren't necessarily always scheduled at the convenience of the people that are stepping forward. And then even once we get up past all that and a child is placed in a potential adoptive family's home, most states have about a 6-month waiting period before that can move to court for that to be legally finalized as an adoption. So it can take anywhere from, we say, 12 to 18 to 24 months from that point of first discovery that I think I want to do this, and I tiptoe into the child welfare agency and begin the process, to that final adoption court hearing when that child becomes legally mine. And in between that is dealing with social workers and court hearings and all of that stuff that just, again, isn't something that's part of our everyday life until you step into it. So I think the unknown is the biggest factor. And what we say to people is really, really do a lot of research ahead of time. The internet is full of links to adoption agencies, processes for adopting. On our website at davethomasfoundation.org, we've got a beginner's guide to adoption. Really learn as much as you can about the system so it doesn't perhaps catch you by surprise when you begin to walk into it. But also take a real hard look at your family and yourself and be really hard on yourself. What do I want? Am I willing to adopt a teenager? Am I willing to adopt a sibling group? Could I handle a child with special needs? And if the answer is no to any of those, that's okay. There's no judgment. It's an honest assessment of what I can handle as a parent or what my family can handle. But if the answer is yes, then explore what those opportunities are and where you can begin to develop a network around you of others who have adopted or gone through the foster care system so that you have a supportive network around you as well. So yes, not unlike the UK, and we have very similar systems as the UK. It can take a period of time. It can seem grueling. I think the one thing that I say to folks is expect the unexpected at all turns, but go into it with an open heart and an open mind, and know that at the end of the day, this is about what's best for a child, and no one intends to make it complex or difficult. It's just the nature of the beast.
Right, right. As you described, I mean, government agencies aren't really known for their speed, especially when they're going to place a defenseless child in the care of a stranger. So
Absolutely.
I guess when you reframe, because I feel like a lot of people who are about to adopt are nervous that they're not going to come off as good enough, and right, and they are doing these hard assessments like you're talking about and kind of beating themselves up. But if you reframe it, that may help, that it's just like, this is a good thing. This is the state doing what has to be done so that these kids wind up in a better situation in which they're coming from.
Exactly. And we know from research that we do that, we take this routine sort of scan of Americans' attitudes about foster caring and foster care adoption. We know that the majority of folks come into foster care adoption in particular because they want to help a child. So they come in for all the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that to get dampened in a process that seems like it goes on longer than I thought, or I'm not getting a phone call returned, or I'm really frustrated by the paperwork I have to continue to do. Keep in mind what drew you there in the first place, which is I want to help a child in need.
Right, of course.
I'm curious about the would you refer to it as the matching aspect of adoption, in that parents to a child? How does that work?
Yeah, part of, again, it's all about open communication. So as you're going through the training, as you're going through working with your caseworker, it's really important. And you do that self-assessment to say, I think a child from age 5 to 10 would be perfect for our family. Mm-hmm. Making sure you communicate that so that when the caseworker begins, when you're ready and you've gone through all the steps and you're ready to begin having a child come into your home that may be in a potential permanent placement in your house, the caseworker knows this family really doesn't want an infant or a toddler, or this family really is not interested in a 16-year-old child. And they'll do their best to make that match. I will say that they won't stop there. As they get to know you as a family and you get to know them, and they might say, okay, I know you said 5 to 10, but I've got this 11-year-old that I think would fit really nicely with your family. Again, stay open, I think, to the conversation, but you don't have to compromise. If you really don't want to adopt a teenager, then you make sure that that's communicated. And then once that child or children are identified, then there's this period in which they begin to introduce that child. The caseworker begins to introduce that child or children to the family. They have a number of opportunities to meet, to spend some time on a limited basis, so you can begin to get to know each other. And frankly, so the child can begin to get to know you. Their voice should be important in this process too, depending on their age. And once that goes in a way that everybody feels comfortable, then the caseworker will place that child in your home to do this sort of, I hate to call it a trial period, but the courts usually say about 6 months. It is indeed a trial period. Is this going to be a match that works for the family, but most importantly for the child? And then once all of that goes through, then they begin to schedule that final court hearing. The judge, though, will also ask at that final court hearing, will ask the child, will ask the family a number of questions. Do you understand that this is forever? This is a permanent placement. Are you willing to take this child as if they had been born to you and have all the rights and legal obligations that you would have as if this were a child by birth? And so the judge will again guarantee and will check the record and make sure that everything's in place. And then once that gavel hits the desk, that child is permanently your child. So I think that matching process is critical of communication. Who might be best for my family, particularly if I have other children in the family and I don't want to really interrupt birth order, that might be a consideration. Or I really would consider maybe a sibling set of 2, but I'm not sure I could handle a sibling set of 5. So really communicating what you think you can handle and then being open to the children that might come in front of you.
Yeah, that's a good way of framing your mindset going into something like that.
Look who we got here. It's our friends at My Software Tutor. Can Excel be my friend? Many people have wondered this for years. The answer is yes, it can. Excel doesn't have to be like the friend that your mom makes you hang out with in elementary school. It's weird. It's always stuff with boogers, right? What's wrong? What's up? Why is that kid always eating boogers? Their house always had the best snacks, too. And there he is. Boogers. Well, Excel doesn't have to be like that weird kid. Unless you were that weird kid. Were you? Be honest. You know. I'm not actually asking. I can't hear your response, but you know. And it's okay if you were. You know, just take it easy with the boogers. Just talking about boogers to get ad read. Don't worry. They didn't write that part. That was an improvisation. My software tutor offers 3 levels of real-time Zoom-based courses with a live instructor. They deliver practical, functional business skills in a friendly and supportive environment. It can be daunting, right? You need that supporting environment to learn Excel. There's no stupid questions. It could be really difficult. And as we know, when we talk about it on this podcast all the time, it could be really daunting to learn something new and put yourself out there. So think of this as like a kindergarten for learning something new and helping your job prospects. Or be better at the job you already have. Get that raise, get that whatever, take pictures of it for Instagram. Yeah, that'll be cool. Keeping it as vague as possible so that you can input your own. Just making a mad lib of your own desires. These courses will increase your marketability, whether you're an employee, job seeker, consultant, or contractor. Register at mysoftwaretutor.com and use the promo code POD20 to save 20% off all registrations. Thank you so much to My Software Tutor. Yeah, guys, take advantage of that 20% off and confidently list Excel on your resume. One of the more interesting things, and this is certainly for parents, whether they're born the old-fashioned way or adopted, is what Rita was talking about, the fear of not being good enough or that you're not ready. Or how did you guys navigate, the natural anxieties related to being a parent? I mean, I know there's that long stretch of like trying to find a baby, and then all of a sudden it's got to switch to the anxiety of like, oh my gosh, now we have a baby.
I don't know that we have stopped feeling like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing.
That's probably a good thing. Now that I'm thinking, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know any parent that feels like, oh my God, I'm nailing it. And if you, I mean, I actually, that's not true. I know a couple that do, and they're full of shit.
Yeah.
No, because so my brother, I have a younger sister and a younger brother, and they both have kids, and we all compare notes. And whether just having a kid is like trying to control a tornado in the middle of a snowstorm. It's just, you just keep adjusting as you go. And then as soon as you figured out what they're going to do, they go the other way, especially with babies. I mean, I gotta say, it's not that they're easier, but like this is, I worked a joke like this, but like having a baby is like having a fish for the first 6 months. They don't respond to you. I mean, they kind of do. They kind of know you're there, but not really. You're feeding them, and all you're doing is like, just stay alive. That's it. That's all you care about. And then they start noticing you and start reacting, and they turn into a dog, basically, where they're just happy to see you. Again, their needs are very limited. They just want to go for a walk once in a while. They just want to be fed, and you just clean up their poop, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then they start developing personalities, and it's like having a cat, where you're just like, you're feeding it, you're caring for it, but it's got its own agenda, like this kid is doing its own thing, and you're just trying to, do your best. I think that like we see firsthand kind of nature versus nurture in a lot of ways, because there isn't a biological connection. There are things that are unique to her. She's very into hockey. She's very into track. My wife and I are both performers. We don't know what the hell we're doing, so we take her to these sports things.
She likes hockey? That's great.
Loves it.
I love hockey.
Loves to play. Oh, she loves
Oh,
it. And
that's
she's
great.
amazing. She's amazing. She's like a rocket on the ice. She's
That's
amazing.
awesome.
But like, we don't, we're just like, okay, do we like, how much or how little do we do this with her?
Yeah.
Do we make this her whole life, which you can do with a sport or with
Mhm.
a hobby, or do we, or do we do too little? Like, how much is like, when, if she says like, I don't feel like going today, do we say, yeah, it's just an activity, or do
Right.
we say, no, you don't give up? Like, you're constantly trying to like do your best with all this stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she's also really funny, and she has my stubbornness, and the two of us will butt heads, and she just has impeccable comedic timing. Like, I mean, as a performer, like, you learn things in improv, you learn things in stand up, like how to craft a joke, or how to put things together, but no one can teach you to be funny. Like, you just
Right.
are, you aren't. And she
Mhm.
is. And so that I try to encourage as well, but I'm also just like, I just get to sit back and watch it happen, and it's amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Even
it's
if like
cool.
you're like supposed to be upset with her and she cracks
Oh my
something,
God,
it's
yeah.
got to be like, oh god.
Oh my God, yeah, no, just like, I'll be, it's there's so many moments where you're like, it's been an hour. I've asked you 3,000 times to put your pajamas on. Just put your pajamas on it and go to bed. And then she'll run in with like no bottoms on. She'll be like, look at my butt. Look at my butt. This is my butt. And you're like, God damn it, that's hilarious. No.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh man.
But like, we live in a town with that is all people that, like, it is Brooklyn 2.0, and that, like, it's where hipsters go to like have their kids, and so everybody is like-minded in a lot of ways. So you find your people, you find like-minded parents, and all of us just like, oh my God, my kid did this. Oh, my kid did that too. Okay, I feel okay. So they're not
Yeah, the sense of community is huge, right?
It's
Like,
huge.
do I have the
Yeah.
weird kid?
Yeah. I mean, from yeah, there's just a lot of stuff, and there's, and like, even the local bookstore, we're friendly with them.
Mhm.
And I went in the other day, or a couple months ago, I don't know what day it is anymore, I don't know what time, and was like, hey, do you have any books on puberty? And they were like, oh my God, it's Ramona's 8. Okay, oh yeah, I guess it's time. Okay,
Gearing
come with
up.
me.
Yep.
Yeah, and they know who she is. They know, and they pointed me in, and they they had it hidden. Actually, they had it. All the puberty books were hidden in a section because they found that middle school kids were taking them and stealing them. So
Oh
they
my
had to hide
gosh.
them, so the parents would ask for them and know where they are,
That's
and
so
blah, blah, blah.
funny.
So,
Kids I can't wait to find out what happens to my body. I need to
well,
steal
yeah,
this
I
book.
think, yeah, well, I think a lot of kids were like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Let me find this book,
Yeah.
and blah blah blah. And
Oh.
so, yeah, but it's all, yeah. So community helps, but I don't think it ever goes away. I mean,
Makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. I did a really terrible one-man show about the whole adoption process, which was just me talking for like 40 minutes, and yeah. And a friend came to see it, and afterwards she said, do you feel like you love your child more than other people love their children because of the process that you went through? And I said, well, I don't have a baseline reference to that. I don't know how much you love your child versus how much I love
Mhm.
my child, but I love my child, and I love my daughter, and I know you love your kids, and we're all just trying our best. We're
Yeah.
just doing it, So
Of
I think that,
course.
like, whether you've become a family through adoption or naturally, I don't think anybody has. I think there's like more common things than uncommon things.
Mhm. Well, that's good advice. That
Yeah.
at no point will you ever feel like you have both feet on the
Nope.
ground as a parent.
Never.
It's a natural feeling to
Yeah.
be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the matching aspect. So in your case, it may be a little bit different than what Rita's describing in foster care. You guys are describing a situation where you're trying to find that kid, but how does that work? Is it the 24-year-old rock star is like, I found this family, this mother, or yeah, tell me a little bit about the matching aspect.
Okay. So if I get too rambly, just slap me. Don't slap me. Stop me.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting. Okay. You can go. Anyway, so I can just describe what we did with our agency, because different people do different things differently. Like I said, getting there are people that put an ad out in the penny saver. There are people that hire a lawyer. There are people that hire, an independent person to go do whatever. The agency, the way they work is they film a video of you. You talk, you answer some questions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is after all the paperwork and all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed and whatever. But then you put together your book, which is like a little brochure about you.
Mm.
And I worked in advertising at the time, so I was like, I'll just lay this out. And we'd looked at other families' books, and they're physical copies. They're like 2-page PDFs that people print out and put together. Although I think now it's more digital. And I just made it look like a newspaper that like I'd want to read, and like, oh, this couple seems nice. And
Yeah.
one of the things early on that we had learned in one of the support groups or informational meetings or whatever was they said, you will never know why a birth mother chooses you. They could see, like she said, I knew a family once, this woman who gave this informational group said, I knew this family once who was looking through books and she saw pictures of this couple and they had a piano in their apartment. And it reminded the birth mom of her favorite aunt who played the piano. And she's like, I'm going with them.
Oh my gosh.
And so there's a little bit of like give and take there,
Yeah.
At the agency, the social workers there take the birth mothers, when the birth mothers kind of come in and register with the agency, they take them through the books and say, here's all the families to look through, see if, who you like. There are, if the birth mother can't decide, there are rankings of families depending on where they're at in the situation.
Mm.
For us, we were chosen, and then we arrived to meet the baby. And after a couple of days, we still weren't meeting the baby, and then the birth mother changed her mind.
Mm.
And so, which is legally called a disappointment, which is like, I think that, I feel like it's way. Like, it is like legally, this is a boo-boo. And so that moved us up in the ranks where if the birth mother couldn't decide, we were like second on the list, because if you have a disappointment, they also, I should say this too, like the birth mother has, depending on the state where the adoption is I don't want to say takes place, but wherever the legal paperwork goes through. The birth mother can be from New Jersey or Maine, but she could decide, oh, I want to have the adoption take place in New York, for example, because you live in New York. Those states' laws are what determines the trial period, essentially.
Okay.
So like New Jersey, the birth mother has 48 hours to change her mind. Mm-hmm. Pennsylvania and New York, I think it's like 30 days. Okay. And so she could like come in, so that's just this little side tangential sort of thing. So for us, after that happened about a month later, our birth mother was like, we were like high on the list, but our birth mother went through and saw that we lived in New York. And she was like, I've always wanted to live in New York. So I think that I would love to have this child live in New York. And that was it. And that was part of the deal. I should also mention too, like when you register, or like when we registered, you fill out what's called a key, which is everything that you're comfortable with, because there are certain things you as an adoptive parent have to be comfortable with. You have to be comfortable with the age of the baby. Like, we talked about foster versus a baby. For us, we just wanted a baby. We wanted to
go through the whole
be there
thing
from the start.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you also have to be comfortable with like the level of alcohol and drug use that the birth mother has done.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Over the course of the pregnancy, and also the mental health history of the birth mother. And so you go through and you don't have to just make these decisions up in the air. We consulted a pediatrician, said, what do you think? And it turns out alcohol use is much worse than drug use in some cases. So part of that is, there's all this is to say is I'm bringing this up because every month we would get a form that says like, okay, well, these things are slightly outside of your comfort zone. Would you consider them?
Got it.
And so okay. you would just get this like spreadsheet of potential birth mothers that were like we really don't feel comfortable with alcohol use based on what we heard from this pediatrician. And so you would get things that were like, well, she drank, like a case of beer a week. Are you okay with that? And so you'd be like, I don't know. I don't feel good.
Is she being truthful, right? Is it
well, but it's also okay. Let's say that happens, and you know that there's a risk of fetal alcohol syndrome, and nowadays fetal alcohol syndrome is more of a spectrum, which means there's learning disabilities. It's not just like, I think Down syndrome, but I think was one of the symptoms of fetal alcohol syndrome. I don't know if that's exactly true. I'm not a doctor, but whatever. There's like severe cases, and there's what they learned later is that like there are some cases of fetal alcohol syndrome that just cause learning delays.
Got it.
And so then you have to be like, okay, well, if the child has learning delays, do we feel comfortable getting tutors or special therapists or that sort of thing? It's just, there's just a lot of factors to consider. And so it's all just part of the process. Are you outside of that? So all this is to say is like the matching up process really comes down to who feels comfortable with you and who, it just works itself out.
And what you feel comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. When we had our disruption or our disappointment, disruption is when it's past it's in the 30-day window or whatever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's called a disruption or a big boo-boo.
It's a harsh sounding word. Yeah.
It's such a harsh sounding word. But I called my adoption mentor friend, and before she, because I texted her and she called me right away. And before even saying hello, she just said, "This isn't your baby. This is, your baby's out there. This is just not right." And again, not a spiritual person, but when our daughter was brought into the room, there was something familiar right away. There
Love
was
at first sight.
But more than that, right? There was more of a, yeah, where have you guys been? There was kind of a, hey, it's good to see, right. Hey, mom and dad, it's good to see you. How you doing?
Yeah.
Which I imagine all parents go through, in a moment, but it just everything that had been negative up to that point felt like, oh, this was all the work that we had to do to get to this point. This is where we had to be.
That's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Well, I'm a beautiful guy.
Yeah.
No, it just everything clicked into place, and I think that's a big part of the matching process.
It's probably just something that you need to keep your mind focused on as you're going through that process of, you want a baby. This is just sort of what you have to do, I guess, to, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
It's very hard to keep that mindset.
Yeah.
It's very hard to keep that mindset. But again, especially right after we had that first disappointment, we called the social worker, just said, once again, just tell us we're okay. Tell us everything's gonna be okay. And she's like, yeah, I know it sucks. It's hard. It really sucks, but it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay.
And now it is.
Yeah. Now it's a whole nother ball of wax in terms of parenting.
Just a tornado in a snowstorm.
A tornado in a snowstorm without a jacket.
Well, cool. I think it's a good time to go to the third and final clip with Rita. Hey, do you wish you were a thoughtful card person but don't have the time or energy? Right? You want to be that person that has a hobby, full-time job, crushing it in the job, has kids, has a family, has a dog, whatever it is, and still, right, sends that message, sends a card, handwritten, something that makes you laugh and cry. How does that person do it? I don't know. But maybe it's Cardist. Maybe he's born with it. Maybe it's Cardist. The Cardist Studio is your personal assistant. That's how you get it done, right? Somebody helps you out with it. That's okay. The end result is still the end result. You're thinking, oh, should I send them a card? That's it. From there, you just jump onto thecardiststudio.com and tell them exactly what just popped in your head. Your thoughtfulness. The Cardist Studio will get your personalized message handwritten into the card and in the mail for you. You're busy. You're doing a lot of other things. It's not like they're going to tell on you. And the person's going to be thrilled. I've gotten one of these and it filled my heart with joy. Even better, it's fast, it's custom, and it's a total life changer. Hey, you're a thoughtful card person now. Look at you. New achievement unlocked. Just go to thecardiststudio.com and you can even use the promo code AnxietyPod for 10% off all orders.
So I've heard a few things that would be helpful, but I'm curious if I pose the question to you, what's the most important
Thing that someone going into the adoption process should know? What would you think that is?
I think adopting from foster care, it's critically important to recognize these children come from other families. And depending on their age, they're going to remember those other families. And they're going to feel a sense of grief and loss. And what did I do wrong? Why am I here? Why did my family not love me well enough that I have to go over here? So respect and honor the history that a child has. And if at all possible, if it's safe, engage extended family members with that child when you feel it's appropriate. The second piece is this is permanent. This isn't a I can give this child back if after a year this doesn't feel right. That determination has been made with pre-finalization, because the last thing we want to do is further traumatize a child and say, this isn't working out. You're back in the system, even though I legally adopted you. So respect and honor who this child is, where they came from, and where they're going, but understand that this is permanent and that love is great. It's exactly what makes up a family, but it doesn't fix necessarily all of the circumstances that surrounded this child. And so when a child pushes back or resists connecting at a point, understand it's not about you. This is about the child, and help the child get to that next level of trust.
That's great. Yeah. It's sometimes we all just need a little bit of space to work out our stuff, right? Love.
Yeah.
A lot of things, but
yeah.
Sometimes you just got to handle it. And that's great. That's a great reminder.
Exactly.
Well, how can people get involved with the foundation?
So we've got, like everyone else, a great website, davethomasfoundation.org. And on there is all kinds of information there. And in fact, I would direct them first to videos. There are incredible family videos that show families that have come together through foster care adoption. So you begin to get a flare of what these families have expressed that feels good about having gone through this process. The Beginner's Guide to Adoption is there, and lots of other resources are there. You can also call our number 800-ASK-DTFA, and during normal work hours, and we're on Eastern Standard Time, you'll get folks that can talk you through a process as well. You can send an email to us, we'll get information back to you, but lots of resources that we can connect you with. We also have a program that's embedded in all of the states across the country that we support full-time adoption professionals that implement a model that we created that really works on behalf of those children most at risk of aging out of care. So teenagers, children in sibling groups, children with special needs, they're not the first thought of people that are thinking of adoption frequently. And so they're more at risk of aging out of care. We give grants to agencies to hire those full-time adoption professionals that implement this model that works phenomenally well on behalf of these kids. We can get you connected to an agency that we fund in a state that you might be in, and get you a direct line into agencies that we know and have funded and know do great work on behalf of children as well.
Incredible. And for people listening, I'm going to put all this information in the description on whatever platform you're listening to, so you're only a click away. Well, Rita, I've learned a lot here. I love knowing just how much support there is out there for people. And so I really want to stress that. I mean, that was like the main thing that stuck out to me, that like, you will be supported in this decision.
Yes.
You're not alone. But I just want to double check if there's anything you think I'm missing. Is there something else about foster adoption that you would like to add, or about the foundation that you would like to add?
Yeah, we always quote Dave Thomas, who said, these children are not someone else's responsibility. They are our responsibility. We applaud people that step forward and think of children in our community who are in care through no fault of their own as their responsibility, whether it's fostering, adopting, or volunteering. That as scary and daunting as this process may be, if we step back and think about what a child has experienced and the fear that they experience every day of their lives, it might take that edge off the fear as adults of jumping into an unknown system. And yes, that there is support every step of the way.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I do as well. Thank you. Did I miss anything, do you think?
No.
Okay.
It was great.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
So we talked about this a little bit, and in this clip, Rita talks about in foster care, these kids have other families, and you described how you've always had an open line of communication with your daughter about, your family story. How did you guys get to that point? I imagine the words are difficult to sort of assemble and to talk about that. Was that something that you learned throughout the process of?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and this is something I learned from our adoption mentor, but because it's always been part of her story from day one. I mean, like, we had, when she was like 6 months old, someone gave us a little photo album. And so we put in pictures of her, and then, my parents, my dad passed away years ago. So I put a picture of him in there, both of my wife's parents, my wife's grandparents, cousins, and my brother and sister and their children. And then we put in her birth mother.
Oh, wow.
And just, and it, and she wasn't old enough to even know what anything was, she was just like, yeah. It's very similar, I would say, to, like having any sort of family member, especially when you're a kid. It's just part of the narrative that, when you're a kid, you don't question it, because you're like, yep, this is who, this is my aunt, this is my uncle, this is my dad, this is my birth mother, blah, 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 blah. Questions haven't come up yet, because it's been such a, we never had to have the, hey, listen, by the way, this is how we became a family. It's always been that story since she was able to comprehend stories. And we show pictures of her at the agency. We have pictures from there. We have pictures from part of the thing when you adopt is there's paperwork that has to go through before you're allowed to leave the state or go back to your home state. So you can travel anywhere in the country except for your home state for whatever reason. The adoption laws were written in the early 1900s in most states. Yeah. And they're super weird. And I'm sure that there's a reason for them. And, when you're in the process of adopting, you're like, I'm going to advocate to change all these laws, and I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And then you get a baby and you're like, I'll do that later. And so I don't think anyone's even bothered. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, whatever. So we stayed in the state where she was adopted, and for a couple of days while the paperwork was going through. And so we stayed in Airbnb. So there's pictures from there that we've shown her, and videos of when she was a baby. And it's just been part of her story. And it's, I think it's a little bit easier because she doesn't look like us. Mm-hmm. We've addressed that very early on. It's been like, hey, your skin is beautiful and it's different, and my skin's beautiful and it's a different color, and it's not beautiful. Mm-hmm. So it was very easy for her to comprehend, like, okay, this makes sense. Like everybody else, all the people who weren't adopted have the same color skin as their parents. And in a lot of cases they don't actually. And we have friends that, they don't have the same color skin as their parents, but it was a little bit easier to explain it to her. But again, because I think because there's so many people around who don't fit the mold of typical family, that everybody's got a unique story, that when we sit her down and we're like, okay, hey, do you have questions about the adoption process or your birth mother or anything? She's like, no, I just want to go play the Switch and go run around and, whatever, don't bother me.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, this has been a tremendous conversation. Thank you so much for coming on. I just, I'm curious, what do you think is the most important thing for someone or a family just starting out in the adoption process to know or to keep in the back of their mind?
I think finding support is a huge, huge part of it. Mm-hmm. Because it is the worst thing you'll ever do. It is hard. It is super, super hard, because there's so much uncertainty, and you move. I mean, we had been moving at such a glacial pace before we got our first call that such a random story. Michelle won a fan contest for Judge Judy. She was a big Judge Judy fan. And we were flown out to LA to meet Judge Judy, go to a taping, and hang out. Yeah, it was insane. And while we're at the hotel, we got our call saying, hey, this birth mother chose you. You need to fly back.
It's a big
when you
week.
fly back. Yeah. It was insane. It was insane. And so we're like, oh my God. What do we do? What do we do? And so downloaded like what to expect when you're expecting and just read that on the way home on the plane. And we're like, oh crap, we got to learn everything. Like we'd been preparing, but we were like, oh, right. We got to do all this stuff.
We'll buy a bunch of diapers. Yeah.
And it just, you just go from like 0 to 60 in seconds. And then, then we had the disappointment. And so that was like, it was a low, and then another high. And then Ramona came into our life, and it was great. And then it just goes nonstop from there. So because you're on such an emotional roller coaster ride, you have to have a great support system, be prepared for a lot of heartache, but know that it always ends well.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Yeah, that's a great message. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Well, thank you again for offering all your story. I hope that for people listening that this helps you navigate a stressful process, and just know that there's happiness at the end.
Yes. And and don't watch TV, because TV has never gotten it right. That was it was like the months leading up to it, everybody on TV, they would just introduce a baby. Like there was an episode of Law and Order SVU, we were watching it, and all of a sudden now she's Captain Benson, I don't know, whatever, she was like watching some trial. The judge is like, Benson, you've been not watching this trial for a while, why don't you take the baby? And that's how Olivia gets a baby, and you're like, motherfucker, what the heck? Yeah. And just shit like that. Like This Is Us, I appreciate what they're doing, but like some kid was, the whole premise is that a kid was dropped off, and they're like, you seem like good parents, hey, you lost a baby, here, have a third. Like,
right.
It's not, they're not Pokemon cards that you can just swap in and out.
Yeah.
Like
although 3 men and a baby is exactly how
exactly how it happened. Yeah. We had Steve Gutenberg living in our house for a while, and that was weird. So I would just say I have not watched, I know the show on Apple TV. Trying, because I wrote and produced a pilot all about the adoption process, and then I was just like, okay, well, it was an experience, and then that came out, and it's one of those things where, like, when you do something creative and you're like, oh, this is a fun thing, and it just kind of gets a little bit of traction, but not big and whatever, and then you see like a bigger thing, you're like, god damn it.
Yeah.
What the hell? So I haven't
had your finger on the pulse of something there. Yeah.
Yes. And I just didn't have the right connections, or I didn't hit the right spots or whatever. But I don't know how on point it is or not. But that from what I hear is the closest to the real deal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty good. But I don't know if it's accurate or not. Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, cool. Do you want to mention any social media or anything like that?
I am on the Instagram, and I think I'm on TikTok. Overall Content Luke, I think is cool. my handle. Yeah, and I would also, Adoptions from the Heart, AFTH.org is a great organization for support, for information, for all that stuff. So I would definitely check them out.
Awesome.
Cool.
For such a daunting topic, I mean, there's so many moments in those interviews that I was just like, oh, it's such a beautiful thing. It warms your heart. So yeah, thank you so much to Rita, and thank you to Luke for sharing their stories and giving us some more information that can hopefully help people who are looking into adoption. Before I get to the weird thing that was causing me anxiety this week, I want to remind you of the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. Just a way to make a donation to the show and then help support me making these episodes. If you're interested in getting home delivery of groceries, you can sign up for Instacart through the link in the description. I always fumble the Instacart one. By signing up that way, you're telling Instacart that this show sent you, and that also helps support the show. I'm getting like Larry King shoulders as I do this, just like a vulture. There's also the My Software Tutor if you're interested in learning more about Excel or some other programs. They're offering the promo code POD20 for 20% off. And the Carta Studio has the promo code AnxietyPod for 10% off your order. So yeah, the weird thing causing me anxiety this week was the NFL started last weekend. I placed a few bets, like $20. Lost all of them. Terrible betting. Just terrible job. But just like the doubt and the shame and, the mistreatment I had going on of myself in my own head as that was going on. Just like, oh God, why did I do this? Why did I do this? This was only $20. Just never miss a chance to beat myself up. Well, as always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.